The construction site was loud with the sound of hammers and shovels hitting the ground. Dust filled the air as workers moved back and forth carrying heavy loads. Among them was a young woman named Sarah. She wore an old, oversized t-shirt and a long brown skirt that had seen better days. On her head sat a heavy concrete block. She walked slowly, carefully, her thin frame struggling under the weight. Her face was covered in sweat and dust. Her eyes looked tired, but there was still strength in them. She had been working since early morning. Her body ached, but she kept moving because she needed the money to eat. Suddenly, she heard a voice call out her name. Sarah. Hello family, welcome back. Please take a moment to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. It truly means a lot to us. Don't forget to share it with your friends and loved ones and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. So sit back and relax as we dive into the story. She looked up, surprised. Standing at the edge of the construction site was a man in expensive clothes. He looked completely out of place among the dust and noise. His eyes were fixed on her with an expression she couldn't understand. Sarah's hands began to shake. She slowly bent down and carefully placed the block on the ground. She wiped her dirty face with her sleeve and stared at the man. How did he find her here? She had moved to this remote part of the city on purpose. She thought she would never see him again. The man took a step closer. His name was Michael, and he was one of the richest young businessmen in the city. 3 weeks ago, Sarah had worked for him. But she had left without saying goodbye, without explaining why. Now he was here, looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. But how was that possible? She was just a poor girl who carried blocks for money. He was a billionaire who owned companies and drove fancy cars. How did you find me? Sarah asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael didn't answer immediately. He just kept looking at her with those intense eyes. The other workers had stopped what they were doing. They were all watching the strange scene unfold. Who was this rich man? And why was he looking at their coworker like that? Sarah felt uncomfortable under all the staring eyes. She wanted to run, to disappear again. But something in Michael's face made her stay. There was pain there and maybe something else too. I left that side of the city on purpose, Sarah said quietly. I didn't want to bring you shame again. She looked down at her dirty clothes and bare feet. I knew I didn't belong in your world. Michael stepped even closer. His expensive shoes were now covered in construction dust, but he didn't seem to care. Sarah, he said gently, you don't belong on the street either. Then he said something that made her heart stop. You belong in my life. Before Sarah could respond or even process what he meant, Michael did something shocking. He pulled her close and hugged her right there in front of everyone. He didn't care that her clothes were filthy. He didn't care that she was covered in dust and sweat. He held her like she was precious, like she was something he had been searching for and finally found. The workers gasped. One whispered, how does Sarah know this rich man? But the biggest question was this. What had happened between these two people? And why would a billionaire come looking for a homeless girl at a construction site? Let me take you back to where it all began. 3 months earlier, on a quiet evening, the sky was slowly turning dark. The road was empty and silent except for the sound of wind blowing through the trees. A big black car sat in the middle of the road with its hood open. Standing beside it was Michael. He was wearing a white shirt that was now soaked with sweat. He had been driving home from a business meeting when his car suddenly stopped. No warning, no smoke, nothing. He tried turning the key again and again, but the engine wouldn't start. His phone had no signal in this remote area. Michael kicked the tire in frustration. He was tired, angry, and stuck in the middle of nowhere. For 20 minutes he stood there, hoping another car would pass by. But the road remained empty. Then he saw someone walking on the other side of the road. It was a young woman. Her clothes were torn and faded. She carried a small bag on her shoulder, and her slippers looked like they would fall apart any moment. She walked slowly like someone who hadn't eaten all day. Michael frowned as he watched her. Who walks here at this time? He muttered to himself. The woman looked weak and tired, but there was something strong about her face too. That woman was Sarah. She had no family and no home. She had been sleeping in a wooden shelter behind a small shop. 4 days she had gone without work because the construction site had no materials. That meant no job and no money for food. She noticed the car with its hood open and the frustrated man beside it. Most people would have kept walking. After all, she had her own problems to worry about. But Sarah stopped and looked at the man more carefully. He seemed lost and worried. She took a deep breath and crossed the road toward him. Michael looked up when he heard footsteps approaching. A poor-looking girl was walking toward his expensive car. His first instinct was suspicion. What did she want? Was she going to beg for money? "Good evening, sir," Sarah said gently when she reached him. Michael just stared at her, too shocked to reply. She looked even more tired up close. Her face showed the marks of someone who had struggled for a long time. "Sir," she said calmly, "do you need help?" Michael paused. He didn't know whether to trust her or send her away. Instead of answering her question, he asked, "Young lady, what's your name? And what do you know about car engines?" Sarah smiled a little. It was a sad smile but also a confident one. "Sir, I think you are judging a book by its cover," she said quietly. Those words hit Michael like a punch. He took a step back and looked at her again. Dirty slippers, torn clothes, hungry face. But her words were strong and wise. He let out a small sigh. Maybe he had been too quick to judge. "I was driving back from a meeting," Michael explained. "Everything was fine until the car just went off. No sound, no warning. It just stopped." Sarah nodded as she listened. "I understand," she said. "By the way, my name is Sarah." Michael gave her a small smile. "I'm Michael." Then he stepped aside. "Let's see what you can find." Sarah walked closer to the car and looked inside the engine carefully. Michael watched her, still not sure if this was a good idea. But he stayed quiet and let her work. Sarah gently touched some wires and examined the battery closely. Then she saw it. A wire had come loose from its connection. It was a simple problem, but it could stop the whole car. Michael reached into his car and pulled out his wallet. He took out a handful of cash and stretched it toward Sarah. "Take this," he said. "Please. You helped me when I really needed it." But Sarah took a step back. She looked at the money, then at Michael's face. "No, sir," she said gently but firmly. "I only helped because I could. Kindness is not meant to be sold." Michael stood there frozen, the money still in his hand. He had met many people in his life. Rich people, smart people, powerful people. But very few would help without asking for something in return. This girl was different. Very different. And he knew at that moment that he would never forget her. Michael slowly put the money back in his wallet. Then he pulled out a small white business card. "Take this," he said, stretching it toward her. "Come to my company tomorrow morning. As for me, my name is Michael. The address is on the card." Sarah looked at the card in his hand. Her hand shook a little as she took it. She didn't say anything. Her eyes looked confused, like she didn't understand why he would want to see her again. Michael smiled gently. "Don't worry. Just come." Sarah slowly nodded. She looked at the card again, then put it inside her small bag. "Thank you, sir," she finally said, her voice soft. Michael got into his car. As he drove away, he looked at her in the mirror. She stood there on the empty road, small and alone. But something in his heart told him that he would see her again. That night, Sarah sat on the cold floor of the wooden shelter where she slept. The wind blew through the cracks in the walls. She opened her bag and brought out the card. She had already looked at it 3 times, but she looked again. She read the name slowly. Peterson Industries Limited. She sighed and put the card down. Then she reached into her bag and brought out the only food she had. Half a loaf of dry bread. No butter, no soup, just bread and water. She took a small bite and sat back thinking. For the past week, she had been going to the construction site every day. But there had been no work because the building materials hadn't arrived. No work meant no money. And no money meant no food. She looked at the bread in her hand. Then she looked at the business card again. "If I had taken that money Michael offered me," she whispered to herself, "maybe I would have eaten well tonight." But then she shook her head firmly. "No," she said softly. "If I had taken that money, then my help would feel like business. Like I only helped him for something." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She opened them and stared at the card one more time. Something inside her said, "Go try. You have nothing to lose." She placed the card back in her bag carefully. "I'll go," she whispered into the darkness. The next morning, Sarah woke up very early. She washed her face with cold water and put on her least torn dress. She brushed her rough hair with her fingers and looked at herself. She didn't look like someone who should visit a big company. But she had nothing else to wear. She picked up her small bag, held the business card tightly, and started walking. It took her almost 2 hours to reach Peterson Industries Limited. When she finally stood in front of the gate, her heart was beating fast. The building looked huge and shiny. Everything was glass and metal and looked very expensive. Sarah felt small just looking at it. She took a deep breath and walked toward the gate. 2 security men stood there in clean uniforms. As soon as they saw her worn-out slippers and faded dress, they started laughing. "Madam, are you lost?" one of them said with a mocking smile. "This place is not for beggars." Sarah felt her face grow hot with embarrassment, but she held up the card quickly. "I came to see Mr. Michael," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The second security man laughed even louder. "You mean who? Michael, the boss? How is that possible?" Sarah felt people walking by starting to stare at her. She wanted the ground to swallow her up. "I met him yesterday," she said, her voice shaking now. "He gave me this card." But the guards didn't believe her. One of them waved his hand dismissively. "Go away before we call the police," he said. "Stop wasting our time with your lies." Sarah didn't know what else to say. Her heart was pounding in her chest. Maybe coming here was a mistake. Maybe she should just turn around and leave. But something made her stay. Just then, on the third floor, Michael stood by his office window. He was talking with one of his staff members about a business deal. Then something caught his eye below. He looked down at the gate and his eyes widened. "That's her," he shouted suddenly. Before his confused staff member could say anything, Michael had already rushed out of the office. He didn't wait for the elevator. He ran down the stairs, taking 3 steps at a time. His heart was racing. Would she leave before he got there? The guards at the gate were still arguing with Sarah when the big office doors suddenly burst open. Michael ran out, breathing hard from running down 3 floors. He pointed at Sarah. "Hey, let her in," he said loudly. The guards turned around in shock, their mouths hanging open. "This girl?" one of them asked, his voice full of disbelief. "Yes," Michael said firmly. "She's my guest. Let her in immediately." The guards quickly opened the gate, stumbling over their words. "We are sorry, sir. We didn't know." Michael didn't even look at them. He turned to Sarah with concern in his eyes. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked gently. Sarah looked down at her feet, embarrassed. "I don't have a phone," she said quietly. Michael nodded, understanding. "Come with me," he said. Sarah followed him slowly through the big glass doors. She had never entered such a building before. The floor was so shiny she could see her reflection in it. The glass doors opened by themselves as they approached. People in expensive suits walked past, greeting Michael with respect. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, Mr. Peterson." Sarah held her small bag tightly against her chest. She felt out of place, like she didn't belong there. But Michael turned to her and smiled warmly. "Don't worry," he said. "You're safe here." When they reached Michael's office on the 3rd floor, he opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Sarah walked in slowly. Her eyes moved around the huge office. It was clean, bright, and smelled nice like fresh flowers. There was a big desk, comfortable chairs, and large windows that showed the whole city below. She had never been in a place like this. Michael sat down across from her and looked at her with kind eyes. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. "I'm fine, sir," Sarah replied quietly, still looking around nervously. He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about yourself. Your family. Where do you stay?" Sarah's smile faded. She looked down at her hands. "I don't have a family," she said softly. "I grew up in an orphanage. When I turned 18, I had to leave. Since then, I've just been trying to survive." Michael's face became serious. His heart ached for her. "That must be very hard," he said gently. Sarah nodded, tears threatening to fill her eyes. "Did you go to school after the orphanage?" Michael asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, sir. I only finished high school. I wanted to continue, but there was no money. I had to work to feed myself." Michael was quiet for a moment. He tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking deeply. Then he looked at Sarah again with determination in his eyes. "Sarah, I want to help you," he said. "But I don't just want to give you money. I want to help your future." Sarah blinked fast, not understanding what he meant. "I'll get you a personal teacher," Michael continued. "Someone who will teach you and prepare you for the exams you need to enter university." Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came out. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I also want you to start working here in the garage," Michael added. "It's a cleaning job. Nothing too difficult. You'll be paid every month. And I'll give you a room in the staff quarters so you don't have to sleep outside anymore." Sarah's lips began to shake. Tears filled her eyes and rolled down her cheeks. "Sir," she whispered. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." Michael smiled warmly at her. "You deserve a better life, Sarah. Let's start from here." From that day, Sarah's life completely changed. She woke up every morning in a real bed, not on a cold floor. She had a roof over her head and walls that didn't have holes. Every morning she cleaned the company garage. She made sure all the tools were organized and the floors were spotless. She worked hard because she was grateful. She didn't want to disappoint Michael after everything he had done for her. When her tutor came in the afternoons, Sarah listened carefully. She took notes and asked many questions. She wanted to learn. She wanted to change her story. So she worked, studied, and prayed every day. One hot afternoon, about 2 months after Sarah started working, the garage was full of noise and activity. A staff member named James had a flat tire. He was sweating heavily and looked frustrated. "Where's the jack?" James shouted, wiping his forehead. "It's over there," another worker replied, pointing to a corner. Sarah walked over quietly. "Let me help," she said simply. James looked at her with surprise. "You sure?" he asked doubtfully. Sarah nodded confidently. "I know how to do it." She picked up the tools and knelt beside the tire. She worked quickly and carefully, knowing exactly what to loosen and how to fix it. In just 10 minutes the tire was changed perfectly. What Sarah didn't know was that Michael had walked into the garage. He stopped at the door and watched everything silently. When Sarah stood up and wiped her hands on a cloth, Michael walked over. "Sarah," he called out. She turned around quickly, surprised to see him. "Sir," she said. He looked at the changed tire, then at her with amazement. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked. Sarah smiled shyly. "I had a friend who was a mechanic. I used to help him in his workshop before he went back to his village." Michael smiled too, impressed. "You just keep surprising me," he said softly. Sarah laughed a little and looked away shyly. But deep inside Michael's heart, something warm had started growing. He wasn't just impressed anymore. He was proud of her. And for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't felt before. What was this feeling that made his heart beat faster whenever he saw her? From that day forward, Michael began to watch Sarah more closely. He didn't make it too obvious, but he noticed everything about her. She cleaned the garage every morning before anyone else arrived. She never complained about anything, no matter how dirty the work was. She greeted everyone with a warm smile, even the people who looked down on her. When there was no work to do, Sarah would go to a quiet corner. She would sit with her books on her lap and read slowly. She moved her finger along each line so she wouldn't miss a single word. Sometimes she helped the older staff carry heavy tools. Sometimes she cleaned places that weren't even part of her job. But what touched Michael's heart the most was how she treated people. She was always kind to everyone. She didn't gossip like the other workers. She didn't act like she was better than anyone. Even when someone insulted her or made fun of her old clothes, she just smiled and walked away. One day, Michael stood at his office window watching her. She was sweeping the corner near the generator house. She didn't know he was watching. She was completely focused on her work. Michael smiled to himself. "How can someone go through so much," he said quietly, "and still have such a good heart?" There was something very different about Sarah. And for the first time in many years, Michael made a decision in his heart. One Friday afternoon, Michael called his driver. "Tell Sarah to meet me in front of the building," he said. "I want her to come with me for lunch." The driver blinked in surprise. "Sir? Sarah from the garage?" "Yes," Michael said firmly. "Go now." 5 minutes later, Sarah stood outside, wiping her hands nervously on her work clothes. She looked confused and worried. "Sir, you sent for me?" she asked when she saw Michael. Michael smiled warmly. "Yes, I'm going for lunch. Come with me." Her eyes widened in shock. "Sir? Me? To lunch?" Michael laughed softly. "Yes, just lunch. Don't be afraid." She nodded slowly and followed him to his car. They drove to a quiet restaurant not far from the office. It was beautiful inside. Soft music played in the background and everything looked expensive. Sarah looked around, feeling completely out of place. When the food arrived, she stared at the knife and fork on the table. She had never used them before. Michael noticed her confusion. "Do you want me to show you how to use them?" he asked kindly, without any judgment. Sarah looked down, embarrassed. "I don't really know how," she admitted quietly. Michael smiled gently. "That's okay," he said. "Let me show you." He reached over and gently took her hand. He showed her how to hold the fork properly and how to cut with the knife. Sarah laughed a little, feeling awkward. "I feel like a child," she said. "No," Michael said softly, looking into her eyes. "You're just learning. And there's nothing wrong with that." They ate quietly for a while, comfortable in the silence. Then Michael asked, "How are your lessons going?" Sarah's face lit up. "Very well, sir," she replied with excitement. "My teacher says I'm improving quickly. I'm trying very hard." Michael looked at her with pride. "I can see that," he said. "You're doing wonderfully." They talked more about her books, her dreams, and her past at the orphanage. She told him about her hope to become something more than just a cleaner. There was no pressure in their conversation, just two people talking. But something had started to grow between them. Not just respect anymore, but something much deeper. And though no one said anything about it yet, they both felt it strongly. However, back at the company, something dark was brewing. It started with whispers among the staff. Workers would see Sarah and whisper behind her back. "Why is the boss always smiling at her? Did you see him take her to lunch again yesterday? What's so special about her anyway?" Some even laughed openly and called her names when she walked by. Gold digger. Poor girl trying to trap a rich man. But Sarah kept quiet through it all. She didn't answer anyone. She didn't defend herself. She just kept doing her work and studying hard. But one person wasn't just whispering. She was burning with anger and jealousy. Her name was Victoria, and she was Michael's personal assistant. Victoria had worked with Michael for 2 years. She always dressed in expensive clothes and wore perfect makeup. She always spoke sweetly when he was around. She brought him tea even when he didn't ask for it. She had been waiting for Michael to notice her, to see her as more than just an assistant. But Michael never looked at her that way. Now this girl, this poor uneducated girl from the street, was getting all his attention. Victoria's heart filled with bitter jealousy. One evening, when Michael was alone in his office working late, Victoria knocked on the door. "Sir, can I speak with you?" she asked sweetly. Michael looked up from his papers. "Yes, Victoria. What is it?" She walked in and sat down slowly, crossing her legs. "I just want to tell you something important," she said, leaning forward. "It's about Sarah." Michael raised his head, his expression becoming serious. "What about her?" he asked carefully. Victoria pretended to look concerned. "Sir, please don't be upset with me," she said in a low voice. "But you need to be very careful. These street girls, they know how to act innocent. They pretend to be kind and pure, but their eyes are always on money." Michael stared at her, his face unreadable. Victoria continued, thinking she was convincing him. "She's using you, sir," Victoria said, her voice full of false concern. "People like her always come with a plan. They see a rich man and they know exactly what to do." There was complete silence in the room. Michael sat back in his chair, still staring at Victoria. Then he spoke quietly, his voice cold. "Thank you, Victoria. You may go now." Victoria stood up slowly, smiling to herself. "Yes, sir. I just wanted to help." As she closed the door behind her, she felt satisfied. But what Victoria didn't know was that Michael didn't believe a single word she had said. In fact, her words had only made him more certain about something. Sarah was real. And that was becoming more precious to him than anything else in his life. But how long could their connection survive against so much opposition? A few days later, Michael sat at a table in a private lounge with 3 of his business partners. They were all older men, rich and powerful. They had helped him grow his company when he first started. They were like family to him, like uncles. After finishing their discussion about a new business deal, one of them cleared his throat loudly. "Michael," he said seriously, "can we speak as elders now?" Michael nodded, putting down his glass. "Of course." The man leaned in closer. "We've been hearing things about a girl." Michael looked at all 3 of them calmly. "A cleaner at your company," another added, frowning. "She's the one people say you're always around." Michael smiled lightly but said nothing. He just listened. "We know you're a good man," the first one continued. "But you must be very careful. You're not just anyone anymore. You are a big name in business now." Another man spoke up, shaking his head. "If people begin to spread stories, it won't be good for your image. You know how fast rumors spread in this city." The third man added his warning too. "Yes, help her if you want. But don't get too close. People won't understand it. They will twist everything." Michael folded his hands on the table. "I understand your concern," he said calmly. "But Sarah is just someone I'm helping. She has no family, no education, no support. I'm giving her a chance." One of them shook his head firmly. "A chance is fine. But this lunch, this special attention, people are talking. Be wise, Michael." Michael stayed calm through all their warnings. "I've heard you," he said. "I will handle it carefully." They nodded and changed the topic to other business matters. But as they talked about contracts and deals, Michael's mind was far away. He looked down at his glass and thought to himself, why is the world always so quick to judge what it doesn't understand? He knew he had to be careful. But he also knew something else deep in his heart. He was beginning to care about Sarah more than he had ever expected. And that scared him a little. Meanwhile, Sarah heard all the whispers at work. She saw how people looked at her with disgust and suspicion. Some laughed behind her back. Some called her terrible names. Desperate cleaner. Gold digger. Who does she think she is? Every day at work felt heavier and heavier. She would smile in front of others, but inside her heart was breaking. She didn't want any trouble. She never asked for any of this attention. That night, Sarah sat alone in her small room at the staff quarters. Her hands were shaking as she held her lesson books in her lap. She stared at them without really seeing the words. School was the only thing that gave her hope. But even that wasn't enough to make the pain go away anymore. I didn't come here to be insulted, she whispered to herself, tears rolling down her cheeks. She thought about her whole life. No parents. No real friends. No home she could truly call her own. And now everyone at work looked at her like she was a thief. Like she had stolen something that didn't belong to her. She tried to be strong, but she was so tired. That night, while everyone else slept peacefully, Sarah made a painful decision. She quietly folded her clothes and put them in her bag. She placed her precious books on top and zipped the bag closed. She looked around her small room one last time. This room had given her shelter and hope. But now it felt like a prison of shame. She walked out slowly into the dark night without telling anyone where she was going. She didn't even leave a note. She didn't know where she would end up. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay there anymore. The next morning, Michael walked into the company with a smile on his face. He wanted to ask Sarah about her lesson progress. But when he reached the garage, she wasn't there. He asked another cleaner, "Have you seen Sarah today?" The man shook his head. "No, sir. She didn't come to work." A cold feeling spread through Michael's chest. He quickly went to her room in the staff quarters. The door was unlocked. Inside, the bed was neatly made. But her bag was gone. All her things were gone. Michael felt a sharp pain in his chest, like someone had punched him. He pulled out his phone and called her number. It was switched off. He called again and again. Still switched off. He got in his car and drove back to the same street where he had first met her. He sat there for hours watching the road. He hoped to see her walk by, just like that first evening. But she didn't come. Day after day, Michael kept going back to that street. Morning, afternoon, evening, even late at night. He asked everyone who walked by, "Have you seen a girl named Sarah?" He described her carefully. Some people said no. Others just shook their heads and walked away. The phone he had given her stayed switched off. Michael couldn't sleep well at night. He couldn't focus on his work during the day. He missed hearing her voice. He missed her gentle laugh. But more than anything, he missed the peace he felt whenever he was around her. And now she was gone, disappeared like smoke. For 3 long weeks, Michael searched everywhere without success. Then one Tuesday morning, as he stood by the company parking lot, the company bus driver approached him quietly. "Good morning, sir," the driver said nervously. Michael nodded absently. "Good morning." The driver looked around and lowered his voice. "Sir, I saw that girl." Michael's head snapped up. His eyes were suddenly sharp and focused. "What girl?" he asked, his heart beginning to race. "The cleaner. The one they called Sarah." Michael stepped closer, grabbing the driver's arm. Where did you see her?" The driver pointed toward the edge of the city. "Yesterday evening around 5 o'clock. She was at a construction site in the remote part of town. I was driving past when I saw her. She was working there, sir. Carrying blocks on her head." Michael's heart felt like it would burst out of his chest. And that's how we arrive at the moment where our story began. Michael standing at that construction site watching Sarah carry heavy blocks. His heart breaking at the sight. This was the girl who had fixed his car with such skill. The girl who refused money because kindness shouldn't be sold. The girl who studied so hard to change her life. And now here she was, back to carrying blocks like nothing had changed. But everything was about to change. Because Michael had made up his mind. He would not let her go again. After that embrace at the construction site, Michael took Sarah straight to a beautiful boutique. He bought her new dresses, comfortable shoes, and a nice bag. Sarah just stood there speechless, unable to believe what was happening. Then Michael drove her to a lovely apartment. It was quiet, clean, and filled with bright sunlight. His younger sister Emma, who managed the building, came out smiling. "She will be staying here," Michael told Emma, handing the keys to Sarah. Sarah walked inside slowly. The room was like a dream. A soft bed, a small kitchen, and everything smelled fresh and clean. She turned to Michael with tears streaming down her face. "Michael, this is too much," she whispered. But he smiled and stepped closer. "You're not going back to the company," he said gently. Her eyes widened in confusion. "What?" Michael took her hands in his. You've done enough hard work. Now I'll set up a business for you. Something you can run while going to university. Sarah covered her mouth with both hands. She couldn't speak. She couldn't even breathe properly. This was the same girl who used to sleep outside in the cold. And now someone cared enough to give her everything. 1 year passed. Sarah stood outside the university gate wearing a simple white shirt and blue jeans. In her bag was her student ID card. She had just finished her morning class in mechanical engineering. She looked happy, confident, and full of life. Everything had changed. Michael arrived to pick her up like he did every day. When she saw his car, her whole face lit up with joy. "Hey," he said, opening the door for her with a smile. "Good afternoon, Michael," she said, getting in happily. "How was class today?" he asked as he started driving. "It was amazing. We did practical work. I fixed a small engine all by myself," she replied, laughing with pride. Michael looked at her with so much love in his eyes. "I knew it. You've always had a gift." She smiled warmly. "Thank you for everything. For never giving up on me." Michael shook his head gently. "Sarah, I didn't help you out of pity. I saw your strength that first day when you fixed my car. I saw something real and beautiful in you." They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Then Michael pulled over by the beach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in beautiful colors. He turned to her and took her hands. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "This 1 year with you has been the best time of my entire life." Sarah's heart began beating faster. "I want to do more than just support you," Michael continued. "I want to build a whole life with you. If you'll let me." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she understood what he was asking. She nodded slowly, unable to find words. "Yes, Michael," she finally whispered. "Yes, I will." He smiled the biggest smile she had ever seen. The sun shone golden behind them as gentle waves hit the shore. From a homeless girl carrying blocks to a university student with a bright future. From pain and shame to love and purpose. Sarah had found everything she never dared to dream of. And this time she knew with all her heart that she truly belonged. Not because of what she owned or where she lived, but because someone had seen her heart when the whole world only saw her poverty. And that made all the difference. We've come to the end of today's story. I hope it touched your heart. Thanks for watching and staying with us till the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?